Welcome to Midweek Murders, where we take a look at true crime around Australia. In today's episode, we look at perhaps one of the cruelest cases. Many Australians know this case from the phone call that took place, where a young voice says, "I don't like mummy anymore. She's turning black." In 1978, in a rural area of New South Wales, a telephone rang for 2 days. For 2 days, it went unanswered. On the third day, a connection was made, and a small voice was heard saying, "Hello?" The phone exchange operator asked to speak with one of the parents and was told that Daddy was sleeping in the kitchen. Knowing what that meant, the operator asked to talk with Mummy. She was informed that Mummy was also sleeping. The phone operator knew that something terrible had happened in that house, especially when she heard the dreaded words of, "I don't like Mummy anymore. She's turning black." The police were called to the house, which was in an isolated area of Jerilderie. When police arrived at the house, they were shocked by what met them. The father, Mick Lewis, was dead in the kitchen. The two children were in the living room, filthy and eating whatever their small hands could reach. In the master bedroom, they found Sue Lewis, dead and almost mummified. The first concern for the police was to get the children out of the house and into hands that could care for them. Once the children were out of the house, the police began their investigation. Their main question was, why was Sue's body in that advanced state of decay? There was evidence that one or both of the children had been sleeping in the bed with their deceased mother. It was quickly discovered that Sue was using an electric blanket to battle the cold nights, and that it was on when she was murdered. The police finally knew why Sue's body had gone through the rapid succession of decay. As it goes with most homicides, the police looked into the husband, assuming he had killed his wife. During the investigation, they came to learn that Mick had been the first victim. The killer moved through the house and shot Sue twice while she slept. The killer then left, leaving the two small children to slowly starve to death. Police were hopeful to get any kind of information out of the toddlers. They quickly discovered that it was impossible. When the family asked for the police to back away from interrogating the children, their wishes were respected. The police found themselves back in square one, trying to figure out if it was a domestic violence case or if there was an unknown party involved. Without any of today's tools to help determine the times of deaths, insect larvae were collected. They were sent to an entomologist in Sydney for examination. It would be weeks before the police would get any information, and they went back to the scene of the murders, taking a close look at everything in the house. The police had noticed that there was no scene violence in the bedroom where Sue's body was, but in the kitchen where Mick was, there were signs of violence everywhere. An upturned electric frying pan, a stopped clock, and Mick's broken watch seemed to indicate that there was some kind of struggle, and yet the bedroom was almost pristine in comparison. It appeared that Mick had been cooking himself a meal, though there were 2 plates found in the oven. The undertakers arrived to remove the bodies from the house. When they threw back the covers of the bed, a small metal object flew across the room. One of the officers picked it up, seeing that it was a .22 caliber shell cartridge. Due to the lack of blood around Mick in the kitchen, the police originally believed he had taken some kind of poison. Now they had evidence that there was a gun involved. Post-mortem x-rays revealed that both Sue and Mick had been shot. The hunt was now on to find the person or persons responsible for the murders of Mick and Sue Lewis. Police poured their all into the case, especially the local department that could remember the children and the state they were left in. They were able to pull in help from the Puckapunyal Army Base to use metal detectors around the grounds of the Homestead, without any success. Plaster casts were taken of tyre tracks in the soft dirt at the front of the house, but failed to match to any known cars. Knowing that the children would be of no help for the time of death, the police turned to the locals. 2 young women were sure they saw Sue driving into town on Saturday morning, and the lady that owned the house that Sue and Mick lived in said she saw Mick on Saturday night. Unfortunately, these accounts would prove to be inaccurate. With enough evidence to recreate the scene, the police came to the conclusion that Mick was in the kitchen making himself dinner. When the bullet entered Mick's head, he flipped over the electric frying pan, which was plugged into the wall via a double adapter. When it flipped, he pulled the adapter from the wall, fell to the floor, and had a seizure that would eventually claim his life. The killer entered the house, saw Mick in the death throes, and went through the house. The killer found Sue asleep and fired a shot at her. It's believed that the first bullet struck a nerve in the head and she bolted upright. This terrified the killer and he shot her again, falling back to the bed. Returning to the kitchen, the killer took $200 that Mick had and left the house. The police then moved on to figuring out what make and model of .22 rifle was used. An expert revealed that the team needed to be on the lookout for the Australian-made Fieldman rifle, of which only 2,000 were produced. Police finally got the CISRO report from the larvae, which reveals that Friday night was the time of death. They had a date and could finally focus entirely on the rifle. Police put out that they were searching for a .22 rifle but didn't mention the model they were after. A command centre was set up to help people bring in their rifles. It's around this time that police hear a constant story of Mick supposedly wrecking his car on purpose for an insurance payout. Sue's parents claim that she told them that she and Mick were expecting a $5,000 payout. Detectives now consider that robbery may be the motive for the murders. Sue's parents tell the police that the insurance agent dealing with that claim was a man named John Fairley. Fairley had already been interviewed by police and had given an alibi for Saturday night. Now knowing that the murders took place on the Friday, the police went back to Fairley. It was quickly discovered that Fairley was lying about which insurance company he worked for. Police found that Mick was sending money to Fairley for an insurance, but that there was no claim in Mick's name. Police were able to pick up on Fairley's lies and couldn't understand why he was lying about the small things. Upon checking rifle licenses in Victoria, where Fairley lives, police found that a friend of Fairley, Ray Rafferty, owns a Fieldman rifle. He gave police some spent cartridges, but tells them that he can't give them the rifle as he's lent it to his mate, John Fairley. The police check the cartridges given to them by Mr. Rafferty and find that they're a perfect match to the cartridges found at the murder scene. Police confront Fairley with the evidence they had gathered and Fairley breaks down and confesses. Police are staggered at Fairley's trivial motive. In short, Fairley didn't want to be known as a petty thief and decided murder was a better option. I'm not sure which is better, to be known as a petty thief or to be known as a murderer. This came about because Mick was demanding his insurance payout and threatened to tell everyone he knew that John Fairley was a thief. Fairley was charged for the murders. During the court case, he verbally abused the prosecutor and the police and began trying to deny that he was involved. The public's anger is unleashed as the details of what happened at the Summerfield homestead are aired for the first time. The rage the public of Jerilderie felt was directed at Fairley for not only the deaths of Mick and Sue, but for what the children were exposed to, what the children had to live with. If not for the fact that the parents' disappearances had been noticed, the children would have suffered a long, slow death, along with that of the puppy that the family owned. Fairley pled guilty and was sentenced to 2 terms of life imprisonment. He was released after serving just 9 years. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Midweek Murders. I hope you enjoyed it. Links will be in the description box below if you wish to see more. Unfortunately, there is no wiki page for this case, which I found strange. I will link the Daily Motion video as I can't find this episode on YouTube. Until next week, stay safe.